At 38,000 feet, there's nowhere to pull over. When the left engine burst into flames, everyone turned to the cockpit, but the captain was frozen. The crew was panicking, and she, the quiet backup mechanic no one even noticed during boarding, stood up and walked straight toward the smoke. Welcome to the Storyscape, where quiet strength meets impossible moments. We bring you the stories they never tell in headlines, the ones where courage hides in silent place. If stories of silent heroes and high-altitude miracles move you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if 200 lives depended on you and no one knew your name? Charlotte Maddox stood alone near gate D12, one foot resting on her carry-on toolbox, a flight manifest crumpled in her back pocket. She wasn't in uniform, just navy cargo pants, scuffed work boots, and a gray maintenance vest with a faded airline patch half detached at the collar. No one looked at her twice. She liked it that way. As a contract mechanic for Ridgeview Aerospace, Charlotte wasn't part of the regular crew. She was a backup tech, a last-minute substitution when someone in the mainline team called out or was rerouted. Most of the time, her job ended before the flight began. Post-check diagnostics, auxiliary panel verification, sign the clipboard, disappear into the terminal. Invisible labor keeping shiny planes in the air. Flight 2280 was a long haul, JFK to Munich, transatlantic with a midnight departure, and just enough turbulence forecasted to make most passengers skip the in-flight meal. The aircraft was a modified A330, an aging widebody running on its third set of refurbished engines. Charlotte had seen the logs. She'd signed off on every bolt that morning. She knew the airframe better than most of the crew on board. She also knew it had history. 6 months ago, the left engine had suffered a containment event. Not catastrophic, but bad enough to spook the entire maintenance team. New parts had been rushed, replacements installed. The airline insisted on pushing it back into service. It had passed inspection, but just barely. The main mechanic for the flight, a bearded guy named Tom she barely knew, had been reassigned last minute to a short haul on the East Coast. Charlotte got the call just an hour before boarding. "Can you shadow the flight, just in case? You won't need to touch anything." She said yes, but something about the way her stomach twisted when she walked past the engine nacelle made her double-check the secondary pressure sensors anyway. Twice. At 11:52 p.m., boarding began. Families shuffled down the jet bridge, earbuds in, kids already dozing. Flight attendants smiled with mechanical warmth, guiding them to their seats. Charlotte was seated in row 48A, second to last row, window seat, just over the left wing, just under the engine. Perfect, she thought. The cabin lights dimmed, safety briefing rolled. The aircraft pushed back at 12:11 a.m. and began taxiing to runway 4L. From her window, Charlotte watched the wing flex as the engine spooled. The rumble under her feet felt normal, almost, but almost wasn't good enough. She didn't look like much. Mid-30s, strong shoulders, quiet eyes. No wedding ring. Hair tied up under a dark baseball cap. Just another technician hitching a ride to the next airport. But 15 years ago, Charlotte Maddox wasn't just fixing engines, she was flying them. She had once been the lead maintenance pilot for a classified airframe program buried deep in the Nevada desert. Test flights at impossible altitudes, stress testing under zero visibility. She'd logged over 2,000 hours in high-performance aircraft before walking away without ceremony or explanation. The only thing she kept was a small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, a stylized phoenix, faded now, almost hidden beneath her flight glove. No one on Flight 2280 knew who she was, and if things had gone as planned, they never would have. But at 38,000 feet over the mid-Atlantic, just 3 hours into cruise, everything changed. It started with a flicker. She saw it before she heard it. A sudden flash under the nacelle, followed by a faint bloom of orange that didn't belong. A shiver ran through the airframe, subtle but wrong. The hum of the left engine shifted, just slightly. The rhythm that had been steady for hours now stuttered, like a heartbeat skipping once, then again. Charlotte sat up straighter, hand tightening around the armrest. She glanced at the passenger beside her, a teenager lost in a movie, earbuds in, unaware. The intercom crackled, static, then silence, then a chime. A voice tight with control. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor systems issue. Please remain seated while we evaluate." Charlotte didn't buy it. She reached under the seat, pulled out her toolkit, just a soft zip pouch of handheld diagnostics and sensors, standard carry-on clearance for licensed techs. And then she saw it. From beneath the cowling, a second flash, not orange this time, blue right, electrical arc, then smoke, thin at first, then more. From row 48A, she had the best seat in the house. The left engine was on fire. Inside the cockpit, alarms were lighting up in waves. The flight deck crew was already running the checklist, switching between ECAM messages and trying to determine whether the fire suppression system had activated. The pilot's voice came again, this time sharper. "Flight attendants, please prepare for potential emergency procedures. Passengers, remain seated." Charlotte stood. A flight attendant immediately blocked her path. "Ma'am, you need to sit." "I'm a certified A330 lead tech," she said, holding up her ID badge. "And your number 2 engine is in active combustion with possible containment risk." The attendant's eyes widened. I have to call the flight deck." "No time," Charlotte said. "Get me to the forward avionics bay, now." The woman hesitated, then moved. As the cabin filled with anxious murmurs and the scent of burning metal began to drift inward, Charlotte Maddox walked calmly down the aisle toward the front of the aircraft, not because she had clearance, not because someone gave her permission, but because someone had to. And she already knew the wiring layout by heart. Charlotte moved fast, but not rushed. She didn't run, didn't shout. There was no time for panic, and besides, panic had never helped her before. She passed row 22, then 10, then finally the galley bulkhead at the front of the cabin. 2 flight attendants stood frozen near the curtain, both clearly trying to maintain composure. One held a handset in her shaking fingers, eyes flicking between Charlotte's ID badge and the overhead PA switch. The other blocked the lavatory door as if that would stop smoke from finding its way in. "Avionics access," Charlotte said, motioning to the panel beside the forward lav. "Now." The younger one hesitated, but the other, older, more seasoned, nodded and pulled the Velcro cover from the fuselage wall. Behind it, a latch, recessed and rarely used. It took both hands and a solid kick from Charlotte's boot to crack it open. Inside, a narrow service crawl space designed for emergency access. It smelled of wire coating, ozone, and insulation foam. She took one last look at the flight attendant. "Seal this behind me." The panel shut, the latch locked, and Charlotte crawled into the dark. The cockpit wasn't responding to overrides. The left engine had suffered a multi-system failure, flameout, bleed valve failure, and worst of all, the secondary suppression line hadn't triggered. The pilots, both capable, both clearly rattled, were trying to restart the left side FADEC systems while simultaneously coordinating with Oceanic ATC. But every restart command looped into an error. The internal fire had likely severed a connection between the flight computer and the engine control unit. That left one option: manual reroute. But that function wasn't listed on any of the airline's training schematics. It had been removed from documentation years ago for liability reasons. Too complex, too risky. Charlotte knew it existed. She'd helped install it in a military cargo conversion prototype 5 years and 2 NDAs ago. She also knew exactly where the override interface was located, behind the avionics bay, in a pressure-sealed housing no one had touched since the aircraft's original delivery. She reached the first service panel, unzipped her pouch, and attached a diagnostic probe to the connector. The screen flashed. Primary bus compromised. Good. That meant her suspicion was confirmed. The fire hadn't just damaged the engine. It had shorted out one of the redundant systems, meaning all signals to the left engine's monitoring unit were dead.
She activated the secondary line, keyed in a manual bypass code, and unlocked the override port, an access point even most licensed technicians didn't know existed. The screen flickered. The interface lit up. Reroute power to alternate bus. Yes, no. Charlotte tapped yes. The system hesitated, then buzzed. Engine left, status suppressed. Temp decreasing, spin rate stabilizing, containment holding. She exhaled slowly, but they weren't out of it yet. Back in the cockpit, alarms went silent for the first time in minutes. The fire indicator for engine 1 shifted from red to amber, then to green. The captain blinked. What the hell just happened? Engine suppression just activated, the FO said, voice cracking with disbelief. No command input. It rerouted itself. The captain shook his head. That's not possible. That circuit's been deprecated for years. Then a chime sounded from the forward control panel. Avionics access. Maintenance lock engaged. The captain froze. There's someone in the bay. Charlotte emerged 10 minutes later, her vest smudged with soot and her palms black with carbon dust. The flight attendant opened the access hatch without speaking. She stepped out, rolled her shoulder, and zipped the pouch closed. Engine suppressed. You still got power loss on bus 2, but it's isolated. The flight attendant stared. How did you... Charlotte didn't answer. She was already walking back to her seat. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced a partial malfunction in our left engine, which is now under control. We'll be initiating a precautionary diversion to Shannon, Ireland. Please remain seated. Cabin crew, prepare for descent. Charlotte slid into row 48A, fastened her seatbelt, and glanced out the window. The left engine still glowed faintly in the dark, but the flickers were gone. No more flame, no more smoke. Just silence. In the hours that followed, word spread through the cabin, not loudly, not publicly, but in whispers. A mechanic had fixed the aircraft, from inside, during flight. Passengers glanced back toward the rear rows. Someone snapped a photo of her without asking. She ignored it. She had done her job, nothing more. But the flight crew knew better. When the aircraft touched down safely in Shannon, flanked by fire trucks and emergency lights, the captain didn't rush to the tarmac first. He walked down the aisle until he reached 48A. You're not standard line maintenance. No, I'm not. Who trained you? Charlotte met his eyes for the first time. No one who would take credit. And with that, she stood, grabbed her pouch, and disappeared into the crowd of disembarking passengers. Not a hero, not a headline, but the reason they all walked off that plane alive.
Flight 2280 taxied onto the tarmac at Shannon International Airport under heavy cloud and the blinding strobe of emergency vehicles lining the runway. Fire crews flanked the left side of the aircraft as it slowed to a stop near a remote stand, far from the usual jetways. No engines flamed, no smoke. Just an unsettling silence after 4 hours of mid-air tension. The passengers remained seated, subdued, watching the window streaks as rain began to fall. Inside the cockpit, the captain was staring at the systems display with the disbelief of a man whose aircraft had just recovered from a mechanical failure that, according to the manual, had no recovery procedure. How the hell did it suppress? He muttered. His FO, still shaken, leaned in and pulled up the event log. Red timestamps, error cascades, and then clean. At 0413 GMT, a manual override had rerouted the suppression signal directly to the secondary loop, not from the cockpit, not from any listed module. What is that port code? The FO asked. The captain squinted at the log. ALX 317G. That meant nothing to him, because it wasn't supposed to exist. He stood, pulled on his jacket, and walked straight to the cabin. By then, the cabin crew had already informed him. A woman, back row, claimed to be a certified lead tech, bypassed the main systems, used a legacy circuit, knew exactly what to do without hesitation. He found her in row 48A, calmly zipping her toolkit, head down like the last hours hadn't happened. He didn't speak at first, just watched her for a moment. She had no sweat on her brow, no signs of panic, just steady hands, grease along her knuckles, and a face that belonged in a hangar, not a passenger manifest. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You're not one of ours." Charlotte looked up, eyes sharp but unreadable. "No." "What the hell did you do back there?" She stood slowly, checked her bag, then held up her ID. Charlotte Maddox, Ridgeview Aerospace. Clearance, Delta 2. The badge was real, but the clearance level wasn't standard. The captain had flown 30 years and had never seen that designation. He stepped aside. "Stay on board. Authorities are en route." I figured they would be. 15 minutes later, the apron beneath the aircraft lit up with new arrivals. 2 airport security vehicles, a van marked IAA, Irish Aviation Authority, and a dark black SUV with no markings at all. Inside the terminal, passengers were escorted to waiting lounges. Some looked back toward the plane, toward the woman who had stopped the fire at 38,000 feet. Rumors were already spreading. Some thought she was ex-military. Others guessed she was part of some elite airline response team. A few just called her the mechanic. Charlotte stayed on board, sitting alone in the mid-cabin galley while 3 officials reviewed her maintenance log and scanned her ID. "This clearance doesn't route through any European database," the IAA tech said.
Is this a fake? The man beside him shook his head. "No, it's too real to be forged. I think it's unlisted." The third man from the SUV said nothing, just observed. When the lead official asked her to explain what she did in the avionics bay, Charlotte calmly described the architecture, the power relays, the deprecated routing code, and how she'd identified the failed suppressor junction using a combination of bus scan feedback and thermal lag mapping. They didn't understand half of it, but they knew this: if she hadn't done it, they would be investigating a crash site off the Irish coast. One of them asked, finally, "Where did you learn this?" Charlotte didn't blink. "I read everything people ignore." It didn't end there. By the time she exited the aircraft into the drizzle of early morning, her name was already flagged in 4 international systems, not for criminal activity, for silence. Her old credentials, those from her time at the Nevada test site, weren't accessible through public or even military aviation channels. They were archived behind black walls of corporate government joint ventures long since buried. But someone, somewhere, still had the file. And they had just gotten an alert. Charlotte Maddox. System override triggered. ALX 317G in use. That wasn't just a diagnostic port. It was a failsafe originally built for stealth airframes running dirty power lines under extreme pressure. It hadn't been used in over a decade, and only 3 people had ever been trained to operate it. She was the last. Rourke had once told her that you never really leave the program. You just learn to get quieter, to disappear in the noise of civilian life. But the truth was, Charlotte never disappeared. She just buried herself in routine. She fixed things. She kept her head down. She listened. And when things broke in the worst way possible, she moved. That's what happened that night at 38,000 feet. Not a miracle, not instinct, just a woman who had spent a lifetime preparing for a shot no one else would see coming. Hours later, in a quiet corner of the airport, a man in a civilian jacket sat across from her at a small table. "You know they're going to want to make you a hero. Photos, interviews, probably a spot on the news." Charlotte shrugged. I didn't do it for applause. They'll want you back. I was never gone." He nodded, then slid a small card across the table. It had no name, just a location, a time, and a symbol, a phoenix etched in silver foil. She looked at it, then slid it into her jacket pocket without a word. "You still remember the pattern?" Charlotte stood. "I remember everything." And with that, she walked out of the terminal, not to applause, not into flashing lights, but into a gray Irish morning where no one would recognize her face. She didn't need a medal. She had the plane, and she had the silence. The kind that only comes after saving hundreds of lives with a wrench, a code no one remembered, and a calm no one could teach. 3 days after Flight 2280's emergency landing, the incident was quietly filed under successful in-flight diversion due to mechanical irregularity. No press coverage, no interviews, just a few aviation blogs speculating about smoke from an engine and an unscheduled stop in Shannon. The airline said little, the crew said even less, and Charlotte Maddox had already boarded another plane back to the U.S., her name left off the official incident report entirely. But far from the terminals and tarmac, across the ocean, in a sealed room below Joint Operations Command in Northern Virginia, that incident was flashing red across a secure server. Code ALX317G, manually executed override, operator C. Maddox. The alert had bypassed every commercial filter. It hadn't just logged the code, it had triggered a dormant trace protocol built into a now defunct program known only as Project Aether, a program Charlotte was never supposed to touch again. In the room sat 4 people. One was a Department of Defense liaison. One wore no insignia at all. The other 2 were civilian contractors working under aerospace defense clearance. On the monitor, Charlotte's ID badge from Ridgeview Aerospace, pulled from the aircraft's cabin camera. Underneath, 4 blinking red letters, confirmed. She shouldn't have access to this port. Hell, the port shouldn't even be active anymore. The man with no insignia leaned forward. She didn't just access it, she deployed it correctly, in real time, mid-flight, alone. The DoD liaison shook his head. She was pulled from field operations 10 years ago, voluntarily. She wasn't pulled, the contractor said. She walked. The room fell quiet. "Do we reach out?" the liaison asked. The unnamed man didn't answer. Instead, he tapped a line of code on the screen and typed one command: activate Gate Phoenix. Meanwhile, Charlotte had returned to her routine, or at least the version of it she allowed the world to see. Ridgeview assigned her to a new hangar at Logan International, quieter, slower, with older planes and less demanding schedules. She didn't mind. There was something peaceful about silence that smelled like hydraulic fluid and steel. She took lunch alone, filed her own diagnostics, and rarely made eye contact. But something had changed since the flight. A pattern in the vibration of certain systems, a hesitation in the response of newer engines, a silence between diagnostics, like the plane was waiting for something or someone. Then came the envelope. No stamp, no sender, just a small white envelope on her locker bench, sealed with a red adhesive dot and a postmark code she hadn't seen in over a decade. QX5 Vermilion. Inside, a single key card, matte black, etched only with a symbol. The same phoenix she carried on her wrist.
At 3 a.m. the next morning, Charlotte drove to a small hangar on the edge of a decommissioned military airfield outside Portsmouth. The security gate didn't challenge her. The guard didn't look up. She parked beside an unmarked utility truck and walked toward the main bay. Inside, she found what she both expected and didn't. A stripped-down airframe, sleek, experimental, part military, part ghost.
covered in black thermal tape, its control panels partially open, wires exposed. A man stood beside it, arms crossed. "I was told I'd find something familiar," she said. He smiled faintly. "We kept it warm." Charlotte walked up to the aircraft and laid her hand against the fuselage. The metal was cold, but there was a hum beneath it, like it remembered her touch. This model never left prototype. Last I heard, the funding collapsed and the contractors vanished. They didn't vanish, they consolidated. Project Aether became Project Gatekeeper, and then we buried it because no one could run it. No one? Not until last week. Charlotte turned, eyeing him. "I didn't do anything you trained me for. I bypassed your redundancy because it was flawed. You made a dead system breathe again. I didn't come here to rejoin." He nodded slowly. "You came because part of you already knew we'd come calling." She didn't deny it. "What do you want from me?" "Not obedience, not a uniform, just knowledge. You touched a system no one else could recognize, and it worked. That means something." Charlotte stepped closer to the open cockpit. The switch panel was still configured for left-hand operation, her design, her input mapping. She glanced back. "You want me to teach again?" "No," he said. "We want you to finish what you started." In the weeks that followed, Charlotte split her time between Ridgeview and the hangar. No one asked where she went on her days off. She rewired diagnostics, rebuilt telemetry links, and updated power conversion charts based on flight conditions that didn't officially exist. She said little, took no photos, and erased every note she wrote by hand. She wasn't back in the program. She was above it. For the first time, she wasn't fixing things others built. She was building something no one else could even see. And every time she activated the override console, the same circuit she used at 38,000 feet, she remembered what it felt like to listen to a machine, not with control, but with understanding. That was the difference. And that's why they needed her. Not because she was a mechanic, because she was the only one left who could hear what the aircraft was trying to say. It began with a test flight. At least, that's what they called it in the paperwork. Charlotte had been reviewing the telemetry logs for the experimental aircraft now codenamed Sierra Echo.
It was an evolution of a prototype she had flown and secretly rebuilt back when she still wore a black jumpsuit with no name tag and operated under radio silence in Nevada airspace. But Sierra Echo was different. It had no internal stabilizer array, no pilot interface, no hydraulics in the traditional sense. Instead, it used an adaptive feedback loop driven by onboard AI, a system that could only operate if someone on board could feel it into flight. She was the only one left who could. The hangar crew, all vetted under Level 7 clearance, stood back as Charlotte stepped into the cockpit. The seat had no buttons, no stick, just a neural reactive panel and a set of biometric sensors linked into a field of near-organic control strips along the fuselage interior. It was a machine that needed a mind to guide it, not hands. Charlotte didn't speak during pre-check. She didn't need to. Her touch calibrated the controls faster than any voice command could. And when the system pinged, ready for sync, she sat still, eyes closed, and let the aircraft feel her breathing. That was what made her different from every engineer or pilot they'd tried before. Charlotte didn't fly the machine. She joined it. The test flight was supposed to stay under 25,000 feet. 2 loops over the New Hampshire coast, minor vector adjustments, log data, return. It didn't go that way. Just 32 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft's internal AI threw a cascade error. Altitude lock disengaged. Odonav failed, and most importantly, the field reactive hull shifted into emergency stiffness, locking Charlotte into a cockpit that no longer followed commands. Ground control panicked. "This is base. Sierra Echo, we've lost primary nav sync. Are you receiving manual override?" Silence. "Sierra Echo, respond. Confirm current vector and altitude." More silence, because Charlotte wasn't answering through comms. She was listening. Inside the aircraft, as alarms flared and the adaptive surfaces retracted, Charlotte recognized the pattern. This wasn't a software failure. It was a live simulation, triggered by someone. They were testing her, not the aircraft. She slowed her breathing. Hands loose, spine upright, she began rerouting control through her body's own feedback. Pressure on the seat, temperature change, G-force recognition. The same methods she had used flying destabilized stealth airframes under blackout over Afghanistan. The same way she had survived a wing shear at 41,000 feet over the Gulf, by not fighting the aircraft, but becoming it. She found the pitch manually, leveled the bank by instinct, listened to the deep vibration of the hull until it stabilized, and only then did she speak. "Sierra Echo to base, stabilized at 27,600 feet, nav assist offline, system is functional, continuing flight." Ground didn't respond at first. When they did, it wasn't base command. It was someone else.
"Phoenix, we read you." The call sign hit her like a pulse of static. No one had called her that in 12 years, and no one outside her original team even knew it. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Whoever was on the other end already knew she was listening. Back at the hangar, when she touched down, the crew looked at her differently. Not with awe, not with fear, with recognition. They knew now what the data confirmed. The override system that saved Flight 2280 hadn't been a one-time fix. It was a byproduct of Charlotte's connection to machinery most pilots couldn't interpret. She wasn't just a backup mechanic. She was an interface, a translator between synthetic precision and human instinct. The next morning, a sealed file appeared in her locker. It was marked Level 9, Reinstatement Offer, Phoenix Tier. Inside, a flight roster, a list of assets, and one mission. Transoceanic escort, non-standard payload, ghost classification. Pilot required, autonomous override capable. At the bottom, handwritten, "You're not being asked to return. We're just giving you the runway." Charlotte folded the file. She didn't need time to decide, because she hadn't left the sky. She had just been waiting for the world to remember what she was built to do. The mission brief said nothing about danger. It read like a courier flight: pick up at Wright-Patterson, altitude cruise across classified air corridors, touchdown at Groom Lake. But Charlotte had seen enough sanitized paperwork in her life to know what wasn't written meant more than what was. The aircraft was an evolved Sierra-class interceptor, fully stripped of crew stations except one, hers. The systems were layered with redundancies, but none were automated. No co-pilot, no AI fallback, just Charlotte and a hull wrapped in stealth composites so advanced they distorted radar returns even on the ground. She ran her fingers across the console. Every switch, every connection point was where it had been 10 years ago. Someone had rebuilt the system from her specs, from memory, or from faith. As she powered up, a voice came through the encrypted channel. "We don't need you to land, Phoenix. We need you to decide." She didn't answer, because decisions like these weren't made out loud. The flight was clean until 28 minutes out from the corridor over the North Pacific. Then the anomaly hit. Navigation flickered. Altimeter surged, dropped, corrected. external temperature sensors spiked by 20 degrees, then failed. The radar cone went blind, and in the middle of the failure cascade, Charlotte's forward view adjusted, not into blackness, but into a light shimmer that wasn't weather or interference. It was displacement. Air flexed in ways physics didn't model. And then she saw it. A secondary aircraft, unmarked, angular, too slow for its size, flying above its stall ceiling without visible propulsion.
It shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have been possible. The comms opened again. Same voice, calmer now. Maintain altitude. Do not engage. Just observe. But Charlotte didn't observe. She felt. Her hands hovered over the guidance panel, not to intercept, not to flee, to tune in. She let go of the yoke, let go of the controls, closed her eyes, and listened. The air wasn't hostile. The silence wasn't empty. Something was echoing beneath the systems, a frequency older than her training, older than the blueprints she once drew on napkins in black site cafeterias. It pulsed like breath, like memory, like invitation. The unknown craft banked slowly and began to descend in a sweeping arc. Charlotte followed, not by orders, not by mission, by instinct. Back at command, telemetry feeds exploded into static. Sierra Echo has broken corridor lock. She's deviating. No response on secured channel. But one feed remained open. The original override circuit, ALXH317G. The signal stayed active, steady, transmitting pulses like a heartbeat. She's not failing, one tech muttered. She's choosing. The commander watched the data unfold in silence. A map tracking the course shift, the dive, the correction. The aircraft didn't lose control. It aligned. And then the feed cut. What happened over that stretch of ocean was never entered into a log. There was no visual, no satellite footage, no landing record. But 17 hours later, at a decommissioned runway on the western edge of the Utah desert, a black aircraft rolled to a stop. No crew greeted it, no recovery team. Only one person stepped down, Charlotte Maddox. Her boots hit the concrete with the weight of someone who had just left a conversation no one else could have had. She carried nothing but her pouch, her notebook, and a calm that looked like steel wrapped in skin. A figure waited by the hangar door. "You saw it?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. "It wasn't a threat?" "No," she said. "It was a mirror." He hesitated. "So, what now?" She looked up at the sky. "The next step isn't about flying faster. It's about remembering how to listen." And then she walked past him, past the plane, past the program that had once named her Phoenix, not because she burned, but because she rose when no one expected her to.